So, one rider here, and I want to talk about single speeds. Now, this is one of two single speeds I own. The other one's built on a specialized hard rock frame, which is also silver, also fairly small, and has a sloping top tube. So this tends to be the de facto build that I go to with these type of things. This particular bike is an Airborne Liberator. It's from, I think, the early 2000s. I don't know. I got the frame used secondhand, and I did get it as a frame only. So when I got this, it was literally just the frame. No bottom bracket, no headset, no fork, no wheels, no nothing. Now, the bike was designed to have gears, but I decided when I was building it up, I first built it up as a one by, so I had a single front chainring and gears in the back, but I eventually made this a dedicated single speed. And since then, it's become one of my favorite bikes. The particulars on this are, I mostly built it up with what I had lying around, but I've slowly been putting better parts on there. You've got a Manitou R7 fork. This is pretty old, but it works really good. It's light. It's an air shock. I love it. The wheels and the rear disc brake came off a giant warp. They're old and they're worn, but they're still going. The front disc brake, I had to buy the caliper, because the fork had different kinds of mounts. It had straight in peg mounts instead of holes through the side. So the caliper that was part of that set didn't work with this fork. You've got the Diatec DP9 Pro levers. These came with the original pair of brakes off the giant warp. And then you've just got some pretty generic parts, a low rise bar, locking grips, Avenir stem. This came from a Raleigh, as did the seat post. You got your felt carbon seat. It's not really carbon, that's just what it says on there. This actually, it's a road bike seat, and at one point I had two of them. I don't know what happened to the other one, but 170 cranks with a 110 bolt pattern. You've got your homemade bash guard. This was a BMX chainring. As you can see, it was designed for both 110 and 130 bolt pattern, and I just basically cut off the teeth and ground it down. You've got a 34 chainring, and I'm not sure what's in the back. This doesn't go, 110 doesn't go any lower than 34. My other bike's got a 4-bolt crank, and it's got a smaller bolt pattern, so that's got a 32 on the front, and it had an 18. I wanted to go to a 17. I didn't have one, so I put a 16 on there, which is a little steep for hilly mountain biking, but for just cruising around town. That bike's sort of the backup bike. This is really the dedicated off-road single speed, so it works out. When I get a 17, I'll put it on the other one, and then it'll be more of a compromised gearing. But this is, you got a 34 in the front, and then you've got a bigger rear gear because this doesn't go down as small. Lizard Skins chain guard. These neoprene Velcro on chain guards, they're great. I love them. You could zip tie a piece of tire on there. You could wrap it with tape. But this is really a nice, classy way to go. Keeps the scratches off. I wouldn't recommend these for steel bikes, only because if you ride your steel bike in the rain or with this moisture, it could trap moisture under there and cause rust. But with an aluminum frame, that's not an issue, and it does really cut down on the dings and the chain slap. That wouldn't be an issue if you had a dedicated single-speed frame, but because this is a spring-loaded chain tensioner, there is still some give in it. Not as much as there would be on a derailleur-equipped bike, but there is some. That said, the chain tensioner is a original Surly Singulator. This is older than the build. Probably dates to around when the frame was manufactured. And then you just have some anodized little extras here. You got your spacers, you got your head cap, you got your salsa flip lock. Hope titanium skewers. These are kind of neat. And you have anodized water bottle mounts here. These are just regular steel water bottle screws. I didn't have another pair of these, but I just painted these red so they match, whatever. The bike's still covered with red mud. That's from 6 Mile Run, Park in New Jersey. And that's where I was riding this last. And I look forward to going there again. This is probably, like I said, my favorite mountain bike. Ironically, it's the least, I don't want to say least expensive because my other single speed, I didn't even have to buy the frame. I got it in trade for labor. I helped somebody fix their bike. They gave me a specialized hard rock mountain bike, which I then built up into my backup single speed, which is pretty much the same setup, except, like I said, slightly different gearing. And that one doesn't have disc brakes. It's got V brakes or linear pull brakes. But aside from that, roughly similar setup. But as far as bikes that I actually had to buy, this is probably the, I bought the frame, but I bought it used, and it was just a frame only. I think it might have been, maybe it was $100. So as far as what I have into it, this is probably the cheapest bike I have, cheapest good bike anyway. But it's my favorite. And if I had to build this all up from scratch paying retail, it would have cost a lot of money. But fortunately, I had cranks lying around. I made my own bash guard. I had bars, fork, wheels, everything just lying around except I needed the frame. And of course, it's gone through some iterations over the years. When I first built it up, I had a RockShox suspension seat post. Well, no, first I had a rigid seat post. Not this one, but a similar one. I think it was a Thompson. And if I do any upgrades on it, they're really going to be confined to Thompson seat post, Thompson stem, perhaps like race face bars and cranks at some point, although I'm happy with this gearing. If I change the cranks, I would have to change the gearing. But originally it had a rigid seat post. Then I went to Lewis Morris, and I went on some of the hardcore trails where there was a lot of roots, and it was like riding up and down stairs, and I put a suspension seat post on it, a vintage RockShox suspension seat post, but one that worked pretty good. And that was on there for a while. And then once I got, I've been a cyclist for 20 years, and I was originally a mountain biker, but of course, with the ban on mountain biking and watch on during the mid-90s, which kicked in basically like a year after I got into cycling, I spent most of my time as a roadie. So these last few years, I've been getting back into mountain biking, and obviously it's a different thing. Bumps are normal, whereas on the road they're not. And so initially it was jarring. I put the suspension seat post on. After a while, I took it off just because this was simpler, and this was, at that point I didn't need it anymore. I'd refined my technique, suspending my weight between the pedals and the handlebars, and not really sitting on the seat when I'm going over those things. So I didn't feel I needed it. I didn't feel it was accomplishing anything. I still have it. I may put it on another bike at some point if I want it. But yeah, the only upgrades I would do in the future is maybe Thompson parts. So bar and seat post, and maybe at some point better wheels. The rotating weight in the wheels is probably where what you feel the most. This is a fairly light bike. It's in the low 20s. I don't know, like 22 pounds, 21 pounds maybe. But more importantly than being light, it's well balanced. Because it's got a fairly lightweight air shock, it doesn't have like all the weight at the front. A lot of these single speed builds, especially if you're building it up with entry level cheapo parts, you've got a lot of the weight in the front where your fork is. And this actually has the weight pretty well balanced between the front and the back. So I'm very happy with how it rides and how it handles. And that said, let me just talk a little bit about some of the advantages and disadvantages of single speeds. The first advantage is that, like I said when I was describing this, it's probably the cheapest good bike I own. So if you have a modicum of skill, or you have a good shop whose owner is a friend of yours, and you can get your hands on a decent frame, a single speed is probably the easiest bike to build up and the cheapest bike to build up. You're skipping the derailleurs, the gears, all of that stuff. you've just got wheels, a chain, and brakes. And the drivetrain, in terms of price, it used to be the frame was the most expensive part of a bike, then the wheels and the drivetrain. A lot of drivetrains now are really, really expensive, especially some of these specialized one-by drivetrains. You've got like 1x11 and so forth, and they just get really up there in price, especially for the newest and greatest. So if you're building up a single speed, you can save a lot of money on that, and so it keeps your costs down. Your maintenance cost is also less. You don't have to maintain as much. You're going to get some wear and tear on the cog and on the chainring and stuff. But a single cog and a single chainring, even if and these are basic cogs and chainrings, even if you went and you bought like a really high quality cog and chainring, it's still going to be less to replace and less to take care of than a full on 9, 10, 11 speed, whatever drivetrain. So your maintenance cost is less, and there's less to maintain. And there is a bit of a weight savings too. The bike itself is going to be lighter than an equal bike that's built up with. I mean, if I built the same bike up with gears, it would be heavier because there's more stuff on it. So now that might not. If you're somebody like me and you're not particularly slim, you might figure, well, what difference does it make? The overall weight of the rider and the bike is still pretty heavy. That's true, but the question is, how does the bike itself handle? And obviously, a lighter bike is going to handle better in many ways. So they're cheaper to build, they're easier to build, they're cheaper and easier to maintain. Generally speaking, they are lighter or can be. And of course, there's the fun aspect. It's like, because the bike does less, you have to do more, but it's that much more satisfying when you get done with a ride. I mean, I was riding this in 6 Mile. I was riding with another friend of mine, also on a single speed that he put together, and we saw a lot of guys on really nice high end dual suspension, Santa Cruz and Cannondale and all kinds of high end bikes, and we did just fine on our home built single speeds. And at the end of the day, yeah, I could have taken a geared bike. I could have even taken my dual suspension Kona Dog, with all its highfalutin parts. But I'm glad I took this bike. It just, it's kind of like a comparison I would make is, to archery. If all you want to do is hit the target the same time, every time, you could shoot a compound bow, you could shoot a rifle. But, shooting a traditional bow or a recurve, which is what I do for archery, I'm not knocking compound shooters and I'm not knocking rifles. I'm just saying, when you hit the target with a tool that requires you to put a little more into it to get the same result, it's really satisfying. So, because there's less to the bow, you have to work a little harder to get the same result. Same thing with a single speed. So, it's a really fun bike to ride. And it's also a little bit more of a workout and requires a little bit more effort, which you could look at it as, well, okay, it's not as efficient as a geared bike. But on the other hand, it also allows you to get a little more out of each ride, both in terms of fun and in terms of exercise. I mean, let's face it, if you don't have that much time to ride, you're cramming in a ride here or there, you're going to have to work a lot harder on a single speed. So it's going to, you're going to get a little more out of each ride in terms of, if you're going for the exercise component. And they're not that much slower than a geared bike. I mean, off-road, for recreational off-road riding, usually not going that fast anyway. So, I don't know. I love it. There's another aspect to it, which of course is the, people who don't know anything about single speeds, they see you on one of these, they figure, wow, you're riding a mountain bike off-road without gears. And it's, if somebody wants to overestimate the effort that I'm putting into doing this, that's fine. If somebody wants to walk away thinking, that I'm faster or better or stronger than I am, I'm not going to correct them, So there is that kind of a wow factor also. Yeah, obviously, if you ride a single speed mountain bike, you know that it's not like, you don't have to be like superhuman athlete to do it. But for the average person who's just not into it, yeah, they're gonna look at it and they're gonna be like, whoa, where's your gears? How do you get up? If they want to do that, that's fine with me. So there are a lot of advantages to it. Now, there's a couple disadvantages. One is that obviously you have to work harder, so it's not going to be as easy. Two is you have to choose your gearing well. It has to be a compromise because you're stuck with whatever gear you have. So you have to kind of know, are you going to be riding in hilly terrain? Or you're going to be riding in middling terrain? Is it going to be a bike for the street and the woods, or is it just going to be for dedicated off-roading, etc.? That's why my other Singlespeed has a slightly higher gearing, but it's gearing that's for dual purpose essentially. I could do some light off-roading on it, but it's also good for putting around town or just cruising around. Whereas this is more dedicated off-road gearing, and I built this up specifically with gearing that will allow me to ride in hilly places. So Lewis Morris, Watching Reservation, before they put the new no bike signs back up a few years ago, because there was that period when they were down and we were riding there. If I ever go to Chimney Rock, which is kind of technical, I haven't been there yet, but this is the type of gearing that I would have for a dedicated off-road bike that's designed for. You can ride it on flat areas, you can ride it on not so hilly areas, but you can ride it on hillier areas. And it's designed. I built it up with that in mind because what I initially had is a smaller rear gear on here. I initially had higher gearing, and like I said, when I went to Lewis Morris for the first time, I not only had to put the suspension seat post on because it kicked my butt, no pun intended. I also changed the gearing. I dropped the gearing down, so I was like an 18 or something on the back, and I went to like a 20 or a 21. So it's like 34, 20 or something on there, and that's really if you try to ride this on the street, you'll spin. It's really slow. It's not good for that. What it is good for is riding off-road on hilly terrain, and yeah, you're gonna have to coast down a lot of downhills because you spin out, but you can get up just about anything and over roots and rocks with this, especially with these big tires. The rear one's a little worn. I got to replace these. These are 2¼ inch WTB Torino Raptors. They're just so big, cool, and knobby that I just haven't had the heart to replace them. I'm going to have to at some point though, because it does hurt climbing. If your center of your rear tire is worn, it's not going to bite. Last time I rode this, I couldn't stand up to go up any hills. I had to do everything sitting down because it was sliding out, which is not what you want. You want to be able to stand. So I'm going to have to I have a pair of really big, nice, knobby, sharp Continentals. I'm going to have to put them on here at some point probably. But yeah, there's advantages and disadvantages to it. Obviously, one of them is if you're riding with a bunch of people on geared bikes, it's going to be harder to keep up. But if you're riding solo or you're riding with a bunch of other people on single speeds, it's great. It's great fun. And, it's funny. I've got geared mountain bikes. I've got a dual suspension mountain bike that also has gears. Most of the time when I go mountain biking, I take this bike. And, it'd be one thing if, all you have is a single speed. But, if I have the other bikes, why do I gravitate towards this? It's fun. It's awesome and it's fun. So, is it as fast? No. But, I'm not trying to make a Strava entry. I'm not trying to set a land speed record. I'm riding in the woods because it's fun. So, and, there were guys on full suspension, really high end, like Santa Cruz bikes and stuff like that, that weren't doing as well last time I rode this. So, not sure you could really look at it and say, that it has limitations, obviously, different limitations than a geared bike because it is set up differently. Like I said, it's like the difference between shooting a compound and a recurve, or between shooting a traditional bare bow and like Olympic archery. I probably wouldn't be able to make a 70-meter Olympic archery shot with my bare bow recurve, but you know what? The guy trained with the stabilizers and sights and Olympic archery bow might not be able to make an instinctive shot with my recurve at closer range. So it doesn't mean that one's better than the other. It just means that they're approaching it differently, and there's a different skill set attached to them, and different sets of limitations. So that's some of my thoughts on single speed. And like I said, I honestly think this is, if you can build up a mountain bike however you want, consider single speed. I had the option to do anything with this bike. I could have made it geared. I could have made it, one by. I could have had, multiple front chain rings. I could have done all kinds of stuff with it. I chose to go with one gear, and I haven't regretted it. So, just so my thoughts on single speed mountain bikes, and that's that. Lone Rider out.